Hello, my name is Opal Rowan. My father once told me I was a burden, then locked me out of the only home I'd ever known. He said there was a dry spot under a bridge and that I'd be fine. They erased me from the family photos, changed the locks, emptied the account I used to pay for my mother's care, and when she died, they wrote me out of her will, or so they thought, because what they didn't know is that she left a different will with only my name on it. So now I'm wondering, what do you do when your own family tries to bury both your past and your future? Would you still call them family, or would you finally start calling them out? I parked my car 2 houses down from Drusilla's driveway. It wasn't full. No, that would have been too easy to explain. The truth was, I didn't want my car in the family photos. Not that I'd be asked to be in them, but still. I didn't want to stand there next to Garrett and his perfect hair, or Drusilla in her overpriced dress, while my worn-out Toyota sat in the background like some silent accusation. I checked my phone. No new messages. Not from Garrett, not from Dad, not even a simple, "Hey, are you coming?" Like always, I was expected but not invited. That's how things had been for years, me orbiting the family like a planet just outside the warmth of the sun. Present, but never seen. As I walked up to the door, a man I didn't recognize stood near the entryway. One of the catering staff, probably. He stopped me before I could ring the bell. "Hi, can I help you? Are you with the food team?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because, of course, that's what he thought. "No," I said calmly, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "I'm the daughter." He looked embarrassed. His eyes flicked down to his clipboard, then back at me. "Right. Sorry, you're not on the list." "I'm used to that," I replied, stepping around him before he could say anything else. The house was buzzing inside. People laughed, glasses clinked, and the air smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted pork. Drusilla always did know how to throw a party, the kind of party where everything looked perfect, as long as you didn't look too closely. I wandered into the living room, scanning the faces. Garrett was already in conversation with some guy from Dad's church. He caught my eye but didn't wave. Drusilla spotted me next, offered a quick smile, then turned her attention back to someone more important. It didn't take long before I found myself standing near the kitchen island, holding a paper plate, unsure where I was supposed to go. There wasn't a chair for me at the main table, not even a bar stool left along the counter. I leaned against the wall, tried to smile at a few familiar faces. None of them lingered. That's when the memory hit. Garrett's wedding, a year ago. My RSVP had come addressed to Olive Rowan +1. No one corrected it. I'd driven 3 hours to be there, helped set up chairs, served drinks, even washed dishes after the reception because the cleanup crew was short-staffed. Someone snapped a photo of me at the sink. Later that week, it showed up on Facebook with the caption, "The real MVP." Not one person said thank you. Back in the present, someone raised a glass. "To Kenneth Rowan," Drusilla announced, "on the occasion of your retirement and a life of service, hard work, and devotion to family." Everyone clapped, glasses clinked. I just stood there with my lukewarm sweet tea, still unnoticed. "Speech!" someone called out. Dad stepped forward, looking proud as ever. He thanked everyone, made a joke about finally sleeping in, then looked around the room with a smirk. "This family's been my anchor," he said. "Every one of you." Well, almost everyone. A few polite chuckles followed. I tried to laugh, too, but it caught in my throat. Later, I approached the circle forming near the fireplace, Drusilla, Garrett, and 2 of Dad's old golf buddies. I tried to join the conversation, but Drusilla turned her body slightly, forming a wall. It was subtle, but deliberate. I stepped back. And that's when I made the mistake of speaking. "I just keep thinking how much Mom would have loved to see this," I said, more to myself than anyone else. Dad looked over his shoulder at me. His face twisted, like someone had just stepped on his moment. "You've always had a way of making everything about you, haven't you, Opal?" he said, voice cool, flat. "Even now, you've always been a burden." The room went silent. Drusilla didn't flinch. Garrett stared into his glass. No one said a word. A few moments later, someone cleared their throat, and the conversation resumed. Without me. I placed my cup on the nearest counter and walked toward the door. The autumn air hit me like a wave. Crisp, yes, but freeing. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but nothing came. Instead, I sat in my car and stared at the windshield. My hands rested on the steering wheel, not gripping, just there. I couldn't even feel the urge to move. Memories from my childhood floated in, uninvited. I remembered being 8, overhearing Drusilla whisper to Mom that I was too clingy. 14, when Garrett told a friend I was adopted, just to get a laugh. 23, sitting beside Mom at the hospital while Dad joked with the nurses about how I couldn't hack the real world. Always the afterthought. Always the extra piece no one wanted, but didn't know how to throw away. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through old voicemails. Most were spam. A few were from clients. I'm a part-time caretaker now, mostly elderly patients who need overnight help. Then I found it. A message from Mom, dated 6 months before she passed. Hey, sweet girl. I know we don't talk as much as we should, but I just wanted to tell you. No matter what anyone says, you've always had the kindest heart, and that's not something they can take from you. I listened to it twice, and then a third time. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves in gentle circles across the street. Inside me, something colder stirred too. The voicemail ended, and I sat there staring into the dark, my hands numb around the steering wheel. That message from Mom, just her voice, had cracked something open in me I couldn't name. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't grief. It was a kind of resolve. I didn't sleep that night. I drove around town instead. Old streets I knew like the back of my hand. Gas stations, that bridge by the high school. The nursing home where I used to volunteer when Mom was still healthy. I wasn't looking for anything. I think I just needed to keep moving, as if motion alone could keep me from unraveling. By sunrise, I was parked outside the Rowan family house. Not my house, hadn't felt like mine in years, but the mailbox still said Rowan in brass letters. Same white siding, same creaky porch steps. Everything looked familiar, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was about to walk into a stranger's home. I still had my key, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I used it. The lock turned easily, but when I stepped inside, the air felt different, colder, not from temperature, but from the way silence filled the space. A silence that didn't welcome, it watched. I stepped into the foyer, expecting at least the scent of something familiar. But all I smelled was lavender cleaner and floor polish, the kind Drusilla liked. She always said Mom's choice of lemon-scented Lysol was a bit too middle class. The furniture had been rearranged, the curtains changed. The living room walls, once filled with photos of birthdays, Christmases, and school plays, now displayed a sleek gallery of canvas portraits, Garrett and his wife on a boat, Drusilla's family in front of their house, even Kenneth at some veterans' banquet. I walked slowly past them, like I was browsing strangers' memories at an estate sale. Not a single photo of me. Not one. Not even the embarrassing one of me missing my 2 front teeth at Halloween. Not the graduation photo from nursing school Mom had framed in the hallway. Just gone. Even a faded baby picture would have meant something, I murmured, touching a blank patch on the wall where one used to hang. I didn't call out. I didn't want them to know I was there until I was ready. I moved toward the dining room, hearing voices. I recognized both, Kenneth and Drusilla. She's coming by today, Drusilla said, her tone brisk, like discussing pest control. I told her you had something to show her. I'll keep it brief, Kenneth replied. We'll be polite. Doesn't mean we're changing anything. Their voices lowered, too quiet to catch, but I'd heard enough. I made a little noise with my keys on purpose before stepping into the dining room. Kenneth looked up first, eyes narrowing in polite surprise. Drusilla stood by the buffet table, straightening a tray of documents. Opal, she said, with that tone she always used when trying to sound sweet. You're early. I didn't know there was a scheduled time. Drusilla didn't respond. Kenneth gestured to the chair across from him at the table. I sat, though every muscle in me wanted to turn and leave. We thought it'd be good to go over some of the estate matters early, he said. Mom's estate? I asked, though I already knew where this was going. Yes, Drusilla replied, sliding a thick folder toward me. This is a provisional outline, nothing legally binding yet, but we've been in talks with the family attorney. I opened it, Garrett's name, Drusilla's name, allocations, property, stocks, the vacation home in North Carolina, even the antique silverware set. My name wasn't there, not once. I don't see my section, I said quietly. Kenneth didn't flinch. This is about who contributed, Opal. You don't just get things because you share DNA. I felt a strange tightening in my chest, like I was watching myself from the ceiling, some third-party observer witnessing the slow removal of a person's existence. I took care of Mom, I said, my voice low. Every night? Every morning. You did what daughters should do, Kenneth said sharply. That's not compensation worthy. That's expected. Drusilla remained silent, her eyes focused on the tablecloth. I closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. I'd like to see my room, I said, standing. They didn't follow. The hallway smelled like paint. I opened the door to my old room and paused. My bed was gone. The wallpaper had been stripped, the carpet replaced. Boxes lined one wall, holiday decorations, labeled by season. A dog crate sat in the corner, with a bone inside. Where my nightstand had been, a small shelving unit now held leashes and chew toys. I stood there for a long time, absorbing it. There was no trace I'd ever lived there. I crouched and reached under the closet, an old habit. I used to hide a notebook under the floorboard, filled with silly poems and secrets. But even the floorboard had been replaced. Nothing remained. Down the hall, I heard footsteps. Garrett's voice, faint and unbothered. She just doesn't fit anymore, he was saying to Drusilla. My throat tightened. I didn't move. I didn't let them know I'd heard, but I did. I turned around, walked out of the room, past the kitchen where Kenneth was pouring coffee like none of this mattered, past the living room where Drusilla was now laughing at something Garrett said. No one followed. Outside, the sun had started its descent, casting long shadows across the front yard. I stood there, looking up at the second-floor window, my old room. The curtains were shut. I stayed outside the house longer than I should have, the wind tugging at the hem of my coat like a silent warning. I knew standing there made me look desperate, but I wasn't ready to drive away. Not yet. The second-floor curtains hadn't moved, no lights flickered on. My presence didn't matter, and maybe that was the point. A few days later, I decided to return, not out of some fragile hope, but because Mom's old shawl, a couple of books she'd asked me to keep for her, and her aquamarine pendant were still in the house. Things she told me to take when the time comes. Well, time had come and gone, and I'd already been erased from every wall, every folder, every table. But those items, they were hers, and I wasn't going to let Kenneth or Drusilla toss them out like expired groceries. It was a Monday afternoon. I figured they'd both be out. Drusilla usually picked up her daughter from school around 3:30, and Kenneth spent most of his mornings at the American Legion. I parked across the street this time, watched the house for a moment, and crossed. I still had my key. For a moment, my fingers hesitated at the lock, half wishing, half dreading that it might still work. I pushed it in, turned gently. Nothing. I tried again, a bit more forcefully this time. The key stopped short, like the inside mechanism had been changed. Or sealed. I stepped back, heart racing, not from fear, but from the sudden, undeniable clarity of what this meant. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone forgetting to give me the new code. This was intentional. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father. He didn't answer. I wasn't surprised. But a few seconds later, a message popped up on the screen. We changed the locks. Ask Drusilla if you need anything. That was it. No greeting. No punctuation, just a flat sentence. I stared at it until the screen dimmed, then locked. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part just sat with it. I stood on that porch with my bag in hand like I didn't know what to do next. But the truth was, I did know. I just didn't want to admit it. I turned and walked back to my car, the sunlight making everything feel harsher than it needed to be. I sat behind the wheel, shut the door, and stared straight ahead. And that's when it came back to me. Garrett's wedding, 6 months ago. We were at the reception hall just outside of town. Mom had been too tired to attend, and I'd promised her I'd represent both of us. Drusilla had approached me in that clipped, overly nice way she used when she wanted something. "We're short-staffed in the kitchen," she said, handing me an apron like it was a gift. "You wouldn't mind, would you? You're always so good with practical things." It wasn't a question, and I didn't want to make a scene. So I nodded, smiled, and spent the next hour refilling trays of deviled eggs and washing dishes while guests laughed and danced a few feet away. At some point, someone, one of Garrett's college friends, I think, snapped a photo of me at the sink, sleeves rolled up, wet curls falling over my face. I didn't notice at the time. I was too focused on getting water spots off a glass tray Drusilla had insisted couldn't be left cloudy. A week later, the photo was online. Facebook, Instagram, maybe even Twitter. I didn't check. But I did see it. A friend texted me the link. There I was, mid-scrub, in the background of a party where I was supposed to be a guest, captioned, "Real Family Support." It had over 5,000 shares. Comments ranged from amused to cruel. "Wow, didn't know the help wore cocktail dresses these days." "Low-budget catering at its finest." "She's always been the practical one," Kenneth had commented beneath the post. That line hit harder than anything else, not because it was false, but because it was true. In the most dismissive way possible, practical, that's what I was to them, not loved. Not appreciated, just useful. I had confronted Drusilla once about the photo. She shrugged. "Oh, lighten up, it was funny. You're so sensitive sometimes." I never brought it up again. Back in my car, in front of the locked door, I found myself scrolling through those comments again, as if punishing myself for thinking I could walk back into that house and claim anything that resembled dignity. There wasn't even a memory of me left in that place. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stared out the windshield and let the ache settle in places I hadn't even known could hurt. After a while, I pulled out my phone again and called Garrett. It rang 4 times before his voicemail picked up. "Hey, it's Garrett. Leave a message." I waited for the beep. "Hey, it's me," I said. "I'm not trying to start anything. I just wanted to pick up a few things Mom left for me. That's all. You know she wanted me to have them. I don't know what's going on, but this isn't what she would have wanted." My voice cracked a little at the end, and I hated that. I ended the call and sat with the silence. There was no return message, no call. Nothing. I sat there for another 20 minutes before starting the engine. And as I pulled away, my phone buzzed. Not with a call from Garrett, not from Drusilla or Dad. Just a reminder that the electricity bill on my tiny rental apartment was due. Life, still rolling, still waiting. But me, I was unraveling, not all at once, just thread by thread. 2 days passed like a blur after I found myself locked out. I slept on a friend's couch the first night, someone I used to work night shifts with at the assisted living facility. She was kind, didn't ask many questions, but her place was already crowded with 2 kids and a sick grandmother. I couldn't stay longer. I didn't want to. There's a particular shame that lingers when you're too old to be just crashing somewhere, yet too broke to call it a temporary relocation. By the 3rd evening, I had nowhere left to go. The money I set aside for emergencies had been drained faster than I could admit. The part-time jobs weren't covering rent anymore. I'd canceled my phone plan the week before to buy groceries. Around 6:30 that night, as rain started tapping softly on the windshield of my car, my only shelter, I swallowed my pride one more time. I texted Dad. I didn't ask for much. I didn't ask to come inside. Just for the garage. Just for a dry place to lay down. Just for the night. "Just the porch, then," I added a moment later, trying not to sound like I was pleading. A minute passed, then 2. The screen blinked. Message received. Then it came. "There's a bridge a mile from here. It's dry under there." That was all. I stared at the words until they blurred, then locked my phone without responding. I didn't cry, not right away. There's something about being tossed out of your family that doesn't register immediately. You expect some kind of fight, some dramatic fallout, not a sentence so simple and calculated it could be printed on a bumper sticker. But that was my father. No rage, just redirection. And so I drove, less than a mile just like he said, and parked beneath the trees that lined the banks of the Tennessee River. The bridge curved low and gray over the water, moss clinging to its edges like forgotten promises. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder and stepped out into the drizzle. It was cold enough to sting, but not yet freezing. The kind of cold that seeps in through the seams of your coat and clings to your spine. By the time I reached the underside of the bridge, my socks were soaked and the bottom hem of my jeans slapped wet against my ankles. There wasn't anyone else there, just me, the water, and the wind. I found a relatively dry patch near the base of one of the bridge supports, sat down, and leaned back against the stone. It smelled like mildew and wet leaves. Not ideal, but quiet. The roar of the river filled my ears, blocking out everything else. I pulled out my phone again, mostly to check the time, only to realize it had just buzzed again. An alert from the bank app I'd forgotten to delete. Account balance. $0 or dollars. It was the account Mom and I had set up together, just for her medications. The same account I'd deposited into each month, even after she passed, because part of me still felt like I owed her more. I called the bank, my fingers shivering too hard to type properly. A polite voice answered, asked for my account number. I gave it. Yes, Ms. Rowan. The account was closed 3 days ago. Funds were transferred to a linked external account. To whose name? I asked, though I already knew. I'm sorry, I can't share that unless you're the account owner or listed on the receiving account. My name was on the account. Actually, she hesitated. It appears your father had primary control. Of course he did. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No. I think that about does it. My voice didn't break until after I hung up. I pulled my coat tighter around me and curled up, knees to my chest. I opened the Notes app on my phone and scrolled until I found a few old text messages from Mom. Some of them didn't make sense anymore, just lists of things to pick up or reminders about appointments. But one caught my eye. Don't let them tell you who you are. You've always known. The irony was thick. Because in that moment, under that bridge, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I didn't feel like a daughter, or a sister, or even a person who used to belong somewhere. Something moved in the dark, near the edge of the riverbank. I stiffened. It was small, fast, maybe a raccoon or a possum. Its shadow darted between the rocks, just out of reach of the light from the nearby street lamp. It didn't bother me, not really. I wasn't afraid of animals. I used to bring strays home all the time as a kid. Puppies, birds with broken wings. Once, a 3-legged cat I named Maple. I used to be the one who saved things. Now I was the thing no one wanted to save. A laugh escaped my throat, bitter and dry. I wasn't just alone. I was disposable. I hugged my bag close to my chest and shivered until the rain stopped. Somewhere around midnight, I reached into the side pocket of my duffel and pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a photograph. Me and Mom on my 8th birthday. We were standing in the backyard. She was holding a cake, and I had frosting on my nose. She was laughing, her eyes crinkled the way they did when she was truly happy. On the back, in her handwriting, it said, "For the one who always stayed." I traced the letters with my thumb, letting the memory warm something deep in my ribs. She saw me. Even when no one else did. She did. And that had to count for something. I leaned my head back against the stone, clutching that photo, and whispered into the darkness. I stayed, Mom. I stayed longer than I should have. And for the first time in weeks, my body relaxed, not because things were better, but because I wasn't pretending anymore. The rain had stopped. The wind had quieted. My phone buzzed against my leg. Unknown number. I stared at it for a long second before sliding my finger across the screen. That call changed everything, and it didn't come from any of them. When I answered the call, I didn't recognize the voice right away. It had been years since I last heard it. Soft, measured, but with a subtle southern drawl that made memories flicker like candlelight. Opal? The woman said. Yes? It's Maribel, your mama's housekeeper, from a while back. I sat up straighter under the bridge, brushing gravel off my coat. Maribel, I thought you moved out to Kentucky. I did for a bit. I'm back now. Listen, I found something. Something your mama left with me. She asked me to keep it in case things went the way she feared. I didn't speak. My chest was tight again. Not from the cold this time, but something heavier. I know you're not in a good place right now, honey. I don't want to make this harder, Maribel continued. But I think you need to see what she left. Where are you? I'm at my cousin's diner off Rossville Boulevard. I'll be here until 8. Can you come? I looked around at the muddy gravel beneath me, the shallow riverbank glistening under moonlight. I could barely feel my toes. My pride had taken such a beating the last few days that whatever hesitation I might have had was long gone. I'll be there in 20. True to her word, Maribel was seated in the far booth of the diner, wrapped in a burgundy cardigan, a mug of black coffee steaming in front of her. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and she stood without hesitation, pulling me into a hug. No hesitation, no awkward glance, just warmth. You look tired, she said gently as we sat. Sit. You need something warm. Coffee? I nodded, and she signaled the waitress. Then she pulled a small manila envelope from her bag and slid it across the table. I didn't read it. Just knew it wasn't meant for anyone else. I hesitated for just a second, then opened the flap. Inside was a handwritten letter on old cream stationery. Mom's handwriting. Flowy, looping, distinct. She'd always signed every birthday card with that same flourish. It was dated 6 months before she died. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. If you're reading this, they kept you away from me. They told me you were too busy, too distracted, too uninterested. I believed them longer than I should have, and for that, I am deeply sorry. You were always the one who stayed. When no one else came, when the nights got longer and the air too thin, when I forgot my own birthday and woke up thinking it was 1992. You were there. I couldn't make them understand what it meant to be cared for in silence, without cameras or grand gestures. You were never loud, but you were steady, and that steadiness saved me more than I can ever put into words. I hope this letter finds you when you need it most. I love you. Always did. Always will. Mom. I didn't cry in that moment. I just held the letter, closed my eyes, and let the truth wrap around me like a blanket. I always knew she loved you most, Maribel said softly, even if she couldn't say it out loud at the end. She did, I whispered. She found a way. We talked a while longer, about Mom's last weeks, about how Drusilla had slowly pulled away everyone Mom trusted. Maribel confessed that Kenneth had once asked her to sign a document saying Opal hadn't been involved in Clara's care. She refused. They didn't want you around because you reminded her what love looked like, she said. Real love. Quiet love. Before I left, Maribel gave me another name. Landry Sloan, she said. An attorney your mom hired behind Kenneth's back. She wanted things protected, not through them, through someone who would listen. I found his office the next morning. Downtown Chattanooga, tucked between an old law bookstore and a notary shop. His name was on the frosted glass, Landry Sloan, Estate and Family Law. He looked surprised to see me. But when I said Clara Rowan's name, everything changed. He invited me in, offered coffee, and unlocked a filing cabinet older than my car. She told me if you ever walked in here, only you, I was to show you this, he said. Another envelope. Thicker. Legal papers this time. I unfolded them, my pulse quickening. It was a will. Not the one Kenneth paraded around. This one had a notary seal, a witness signature, and a line that read, I leave the entirety of my personal assets, including items held in trust and private accounts, to my daughter, Opal Rowan, for her sole and unrestricted use. Just one name, mine. No Garrett, no Drusilla. Only me. Landry sat quietly as I read. She didn't want the others to know unless she was gone and things had gone badly, he said. She feared they'd twist it. So she kept it with me. Legally, it's enforceable. But it'll be a fight. I leaned back in the chair. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt the edge of something solid under my feet. Not victory. Not yet. but traction. I asked if I could keep a copy. He handed it to me, already made. On the way out, I passed by a mirror in the hallway. I barely recognized the woman staring back, pale, thinner than I remembered, eyes bruised by exhaustion. But there was something else, too. A flicker of fire. I went home. Well, back to the rental. Showered, ate, slept, for almost 12 hours straight. The next day, I called Kenneth. Not because I wanted to talk, because I needed closure. He answered on the third ring. "What now?" he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I want to talk about Mom's will," I said. "She already took care of that." "I have a copy," I said. "A real one, dated 6 months before she passed." Silence. Then, "You think a piece of paper's going to fix your failures?" "I think it tells the truth," I replied. He laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. "I have 2 children," he said coldly. "You? You were just her charity case." Click. The line went dead. And that was it. No screaming, no arguing, just a sentence sharp enough to slice bone. That night, I took the papers out again, read every word, then folded them back neatly. I emailed Mr. Sloan. "I'm ready to proceed." The next morning, I stepped out into the sun, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. They had the house, the reputation, the lies, but I had the truth, and that was more than enough to begin. 3 days after I walked out of Landry Sloan's office with a copy of Mom's real will tucked safely in my bag, I found myself back on the porch I once stood on as a little girl, waiting for my father to open the door. This time, I didn't knock. Drusilla opened it instead. She must have been watching through the curtains because she swung the door wide before I could lift my hand. Her smile was tight. The kind of smile you give to an unexpected guest when you're not sure whether to offer coffee or call security. "Opal," she said with a practiced sweetness, "we weren't expecting you." I stepped past her without answering. My boots tapped against the polished floor with a rhythm I didn't recognize in myself. Confident, certain, not begging anymore. Kenneth appeared from the hallway. He had a newspaper in hand and reading glasses balanced on the edge of his nose. He stopped when he saw me, expression shifting from mild surprise to visible irritation. "You're back," he said, like I was an unpaid bill that somehow showed up again after being written off. I held up the red folder in my hand and nodded toward the kitchen. "We're not doing this here," he said, already shaking his head. "We are," I replied. "I'm not staying long." The kitchen looked exactly like I remembered, except colder, more polished. Like it had been scrubbed too clean, trying too hard to impress someone who wasn't coming. I placed the folder on the table. It landed with a quiet, satisfying thud. Inside were the notarized pages of the original will. Clara's real wishes. Her handwriting. Her name. My name. On top, a yellow sticky note I'd written last night in small, steady script. "She trusted me more than you'll ever understand." Kenneth picked up the first page, flipping through silently. His jaw flexed. His eyes didn't lift once. Drusilla hovered behind him, arms folded. Her polished nails tapped against her arm like a ticking clock. "She was confused when she wrote this," Drusilla said finally. "You know that. She wasn't thinking clearly." "She was clearer than she'd been in months," I replied. "She knew exactly what she wanted. That's why she gave it to a lawyer outside this house. One she trusted." "You forged this," Drusilla snapped. "This is fake. You've been living out of a suitcase and now you want to steal—" "I didn't forge anything," I said, cutting her off. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "And if you're so sure it's fake, you won't mind letting the court take a look." Kenneth finally set the papers down. "You think a piece of paper gives you a seat at this table?" he asked, voice cold enough to make the window frost over. "No," I said. "But your wife did." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. He looked away first. Drusilla scoffed, grabbing the folder and storming out of the room. I didn't follow. I didn't have to. 2 days later, I was served a formal notice from the Rowan family attorney. Drusilla had filed for an emergency injunction, claiming the will I submitted was invalid based on Clara's declining mental health at the time of its signing. Landry had warned me this might happen. He wasn't rattled when I called. "They're going to try and delay it," he said. "It's their first move." "Don't take it personally." I didn't, not anymore. Still, when I stood in front of the judge at the county courthouse, hands clasped, I felt the sting of something I hadn't anticipated. Shame, not because of anything I'd done, but because they were still playing the same game they always had. Twist the narrative, make me look like the one chasing money, the unstable one, the outsider. The judge ruled that the matter required further jurisdictional review, no immediate validation, no dismissal, just delay. It wasn't a defeat, but it wasn't a win either. Afterward, I stepped out onto the courthouse steps. The autumn sun was warm against my cheeks. I sat on the concrete ledge near the parking lot, pulled a small coffee from my coat pocket, still lukewarm, and sipped. "You delayed me," I whispered. "You didn't erase me." I took out my phone and called Landry. "We're going all the way," I told him. He didn't hesitate, already drafting the formal mediation request. That afternoon, Kenneth received a letter delivered to his mailbox by courier. Inside was a simple note: "Mediation requested. Counsel will be present. Evidence enclosed." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was legal, binding, real. For once, they wouldn't be able to talk their way around it. They could ignore my calls. They could delete my name from picture frames and party invitations, but they couldn't delete a court summons. That night, I sat on the steps outside my apartment building, looking out over the cracked parking lot and flickering streetlight. I watched as a stray cat crept out from under a car and curled into the corner beside a recycling bin. It looked up at me with wide, green eyes before curling tighter into itself. I didn't reach out. But I understood. The next morning, I woke early, dressed in a navy suit I hadn't worn in years, and packed a folder of documents into a worn leather briefcase. As I zipped it shut, I glanced at the sticky note Mom had once left on the fridge. I'd kept it tucked in the corner of my bathroom mirror. "Don't forget who you are." 7 days passed. 7 days since Kenneth opened that envelope and read Clara's real will with his own eyes. 7 days since Drusilla stormed off with a folder full of rage and no answers. 7 days since I stood in front of a courthouse, not as a daughter begging to be heard, but as a woman demanding her mother's truth to be honored. They had no idea I had more than just paper. That Monday morning, I walked into the Rowan family's corporate building, the same one Dad had used for decades to host community fundraisers, family meetings, and every fake smile he'd ever flashed in front of a camera. This time, I wasn't invited. But I wasn't a guest either. The mediation room was on the 3rd floor. I arrived 10 minutes early. I wasn't dressed to impress, just a navy suit I bought secondhand, hair tied back, no makeup, simple, focused. My only accessory, a flash drive in my coat pocket. When I stepped into the room, they were already seated. Kenneth sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Drusilla was beside him, her posture straight, lips pursed like she was preparing to endure a dental procedure. Garrett was there too, avoiding my eyes, fidgeting with his cufflink. Their attorney, Mr. Bennett, had that same smug look I remembered from when I was 14, and he drafted my parents' living trust. I nodded at them, said nothing, and took my seat at the other end. The mediator, a woman named Sharon from the state bar, began with pleasantries. Neutral, detached. I didn't hear most of it, because this wasn't about kindness anymore. It was about truth. "Let's begin," she finally said, clasping her hands. "Miss Rowan, you may present your materials first." Before I could speak, Drusilla slid a folder across the table. "We'd like to present an updated will," she said, her voice tight. "Signed by Clara Rowan 8 weeks before her passing. This version reflects her most recent wishes, designating shared assets between her children, Opal not included." The mediator took the document, scanning it briefly. Kenneth added, "We have reason to believe Ms. Opal Rowan may be contesting this for personal gain. She's been estranged from the family for years and unfortunately has struggled with mental and financial instability." I looked at him. "You just lied under oath," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" Kenneth said, feigning confusion. "I was my mother's primary caretaker for the last 11 months of her life. I lived with her. I managed her medication schedule. I bathed her. I cleaned the house. I changed her bedding. I have records, home nurse logs, receipts, appointment confirmations. I slid a packet across the table. The mediator raised her eyebrows as she flipped through the documentation. Mr. Bennett cleared his throat. Even so, Clara's state of mind. I have something else, I said, cutting him off. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and placed it on the table. I'd like to play a piece of video evidence. It was recorded legally. My mother knew about it. She asked a friend to set it up. Sharon nodded. Mr. Bennett started to object, but she held up her hand. I'll allow it. If there's a legal issue, we'll discuss it after review. The room went still as Sharon plugged the drive into her laptop. The screen lit up on the wall behind her, projecting the grainy footage. It was Clara, in her bed, pale, thin, her eyes dim but aware. Kenneth sat at her side. Drusilla stood near the foot of the bed, holding a piece of paper. You need to sign this, Drusilla said in the video. It's the updated version. It simplifies everything. No, Clara whispered. You're not thinking clearly, Kenneth added, his voice calm. You're confused. I know what you're doing, Clara said, her voice barely above a breath. You want to shut her out. She's not stable, Drusilla snapped. She can't take care of what you're leaving behind. She's been taking care of me. A pause. If you don't sign this, Drusilla said, voice colder, we'll have to reduce your care. We don't have the money to keep this up. Silence. Then Clara turned her face away, tears slipping down the side of her cheek. I already made my decision. She gets everything. The screen froze. No one spoke. Garrett leaned forward and buried his face in his hands. Drusilla's cheeks were red, her jaw locked. Mr. Bennett muttered something under his breath. Kenneth didn't move, his eyes fixed on the screen like he could will it to disappear. Sharon closed the laptop gently. She looked to Kenneth's lawyer and said flatly, This is bad. You need to settle. For a full minute, the room breathed silence. I stood. You called me a burden, I said, steady now. You erased me from pictures, from rooms, from documents, but you forgot one thing. I didn't need your seat at the table. I looked at Kenneth. She gave me hers. No one responded. I didn't wait for them to. I walked out. The air outside was crisp, almost sweet. The leaves had started to change, and the breeze lifted the ends of my jacket as I walked toward the elevator. By the time I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No words, just a link. I clicked. It was the video. Uploaded. Public. By who? I didn't know. But the caption read, Family secrets don't stay buried forever. By the second day after the video leaked, the silence from my family was deafening. Not one phone call, not a single email or text from Kenneth. Drusilla hadn't even bothered to issue some kind of damage control statement, which was very unlike her. I figured they were scrambling behind closed doors, trying to rewrite a story that now belonged to everyone else. The video had taken on a life of its own. Local news stations picked it up. A community podcast I'd never heard of replayed audio clips over a segment titled, How Power Fails Without Accountability. And then came the comments. Thousands. Most were strangers. Some were friends I hadn't heard from in years. A few were former church members who remembered Mom from the women's prayer group. All of them had one thing in common. They believed me. But more than that, they believed her. Clara Rowan had finally been heard. It wasn't enough, though. Not for me. Not yet. Because the last promise I made to Mom, whispered into her hair the night before she passed, was that I'd never let her memory get rewritten by those who didn't truly know her. And she deserved to be remembered, truthfully, wholly, and without shame. So I booked the smallest room at a non-denominational community center by the river, the same one where Mom once helped organize food drives during the winter months. I didn't send out a press release. I didn't invite Kenneth. I didn't include Drusilla or Garrett. This time I chose the guest list. 12 chairs. That's all I set out. No floral arrangements, no slideshow with dramatic music, just a simple folding table draped with one of Mom's old scarves, a white candle, and the only photo I ever loved of us, me at 8, her with crow's feet at the corners of her eyes and a full, honest laugh caught mid-frame. I arrived early and arranged the room myself. The staff offered to help, but I declined. I needed to touch every chair. Needed to make the room feel like mine before anyone else stepped inside. One by one, they came. Maribel was first, holding a Tupperware of cornbread she insisted Mom would have scolded her for bringing. "A memorial is no place for food," she'd say. Maribel laughed softly, wiping at her eyes, but she never turned down mine. Next came Ellen and Reggie, two elderly patients I had cared for in my early nursing days. Both used walkers now, both insisted on being there because Miss Clara raised a girl who listened. That's rare. Then came Mr. Sloan, dressed in a crisp gray suit, notepad in hand, as though prepared to mediate if my family decided to crash the event. They didn't. The room filled slowly, respectfully. There was no hush when I stood to speak, no shifting in chairs, no coughs to interrupt the quiet. I didn't write a speech. I couldn't. I just let the words come the way I always wished they had when Mom was still here. "My mother wasn't perfect," I began, voice steady. "She could be stubborn. She had her pride. She didn't always say what she felt, but she felt deeply. She believed in showing up for people, even when they didn't notice." I paused, looking around the room. "She left me everything. Not because I was the smartest, not because I had my life together, but because I stayed. Because I never stopped believing that her voice mattered, even when others tried to drown it out." I saw tears, not dramatic sobs, just glistening eyes and tilted heads, like people truly listening. "She didn't give me a house or a business. She gave me a voice, one I wasn't supposed to use." I picked up the photo then, showing the room. Me in overalls, arms flung around her waist, frosting on my chin. Her smiling like she hadn't in years. "She wrote something on the back," I said. "I found it after she passed." I flipped it. For the one who never left my side. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it take me under. "You didn't just leave me a will, Mom," I whispered. "You left me the truth, and that's more than they ever wanted me to have." I lit the candle, set the photo beside it, and sat down. No applause, no reactions demanded. Just the kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. When the memorial ended, people lingered. They shared stories, some I'd heard, some I hadn't. Stories about how Clara taught Sunday school to teenagers who didn't want to be there. How she once kept a family of raccoons from being euthanized because every creature has a right to life, even the thieves. Mr. Sloan shook my hand as he left. "She'd be proud," he said, "not just for fighting, for staying kind through it all." Outside, the sun had started to rise higher in the sky, casting a soft glow across the river. The community center staff had already started stacking the chairs. I stayed behind, locking up, sweeping the floor one last time. On my way out, I pulled my phone from my pocket. One new email, from Drusilla. Subject: "I'm sorry." I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there, unread. Because sometimes silence is the most powerful response. Rumors had already begun to swirl. Kenneth was reportedly stepping down from his board position at the Veterans Foundation. One of the donors had pulled out. Word around town was that Rowan was no longer a name you put on your sponsorship banners. But none of that mattered to me anymore, because I'd already let go. As I locked the door behind me and stepped into the cool light of morning, I realized something. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to get back in. The building wasn't much. Old brick, chipped in corners, with a community center sign faded just enough to remind you it had history. 3 months had passed since I last walked out of the same space, locking the door behind me after Mom's memorial. That day had closed a chapter. Today felt like writing a new one. The Clara Rowan Foundation wasn't a non-profit with a glossy website or celebrity sponsors. We didn't have a fancy mission statement or marketing team, but we had purpose, and that was enough. I arrived 2 hours early to prepare the room for the launch. I didn't trust anyone else to do it, not out of control, but because this moment needed my fingerprints. I set up a long folding table near the front and laid out printed name tags, each hand-cut and laminated the night before at the 24-hour FedEx. The smell of warm plastic still clung to the edges. Each name belonged to a young woman in Chattanooga who had written to us, daughters caring for aging parents without support, first-generation college students paying their own way, women who had raised siblings while their own dreams waited. I knew those girls. I had been them. The room itself was simple. 40 chairs arranged in 2 tidy blocks. A projector screen on the far wall. Beside the podium, I placed Mom's scarf again, the same one from her memorial. It didn't match anything in the room. It didn't have to. It belonged. Around 9, people started trickling in. Maribel was first, as usual, with a box of fresh muffins and a look that said, "Don't you dare tell me you ate breakfast." I hugged her. Then came a small group from a local women's shelter, followed by 2 high school counselors I'd invited last minute. The room filled slowly but steadily, with the quiet hum of folding chairs, coffee being poured, and soft greetings between strangers who already felt like allies. I stood near the back for a moment, watching it all come to life. Then I saw him. Near the doorway, lingering by the wall, stood an older man with gray hair and a brown jacket. His back was turned, but something in his posture pulled at me. For half a second, I thought it was Kenneth. My chest tightened. My hand clenched around the folder I was holding. He turned slightly, and I realized it wasn't him, but my body still reacted. The flinch was real. The unease was there. Scars, not wounds. I gave myself a breath, then another. Let the memory pass like a shadow over pavement. Not stopping. Not staying. At 10 sharp, I stepped up to the podium. There was no microphone, just my voice and a room that listened. "Thank you for coming," I began. "I know some of you are here because you believed in this idea before it even had a name. Others are here because you saw a video, heard a story, or maybe just felt something shift in your own heart." I glanced around the room, pausing to meet a few eyes. This isn't about me, not really. It's about the people who stay. The ones who don't get headlines or thank you cards. The ones who carry more than their names. They carry silence, guilt, and love no one asked them to give. Someone in the front wiped at her eyes. My mother wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but she had this incredible way of making people feel seen, especially when they felt invisible. She gave everything she had, even when she had almost nothing left. I paused. When she left me her name, her truth, her story, she wasn't trying to give me power, she was trying to give me peace. And I want to pass that on. I didn't clap. No one did. That wasn't the point. It wasn't a TED Talk. After the speech, I stepped down and took a seat near the side. One of the volunteers continued with the agenda, reading out scholarship recipients and the short bios each had submitted. As she read, I reached into my bag and pulled out a letter, unopened. It was dated 3 months ago, 2 days after Mom's memorial. I had written it in a moment of clarity, late one night, when I thought I might actually mail it. It was addressed to Kenneth. I stood quietly, slipped out the back door, and walked behind the building. There, under the shadow of the dumpster, I struck a match. The paper curled at the edges, blackened, turned to ash before I even finished reading the first paragraph aloud. "You were right," it had said. "I was a burden, but not to her, only to you." I dropped the last corner of the page and let it fall. No wind, no audience, just me, letting it go. Back inside, the event continued. I made my way to the coffee table, where a girl no older than 20 handed me a cup. "You're Opal, right?" she asked. I nodded. She hesitated, then said, "I didn't know people like you existed." I smiled. "Neither did I told her. Until I had to become one." We sat for a few minutes, talking. She told me about caring for her grandmother while working 2 jobs, about how her siblings left when things got hard, about how tired she was, and how much she loved anyway. Before she left, I gave her a copy of the foundation brochure and my personal number written on the back. "Call me if you ever need someone to remind you what you're worth," I said. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. When the event ended, I stayed behind to clean up. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something holy in folding chairs and collecting used coffee cups. Something sacred in building something that no one could take from you. On my way out, I passed the front sign, the Clara Rowan Foundation. I touched the wood panel gently, then whispered, "You were never just a will, Mom. You were my reason." Sometimes, the people meant to protect you are the ones who leave the deepest scars. But as Opal's story reminds us, being discarded doesn't mean you're broken, and silence isn't weakness. It can be the beginning of something louder than anger, truth. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own family? What did you do with that pain? If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more real, emotional family stories just like this one. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear.